right, it looks like folks are logging in. Let's go ahead and get started here. I'd like to welcome everyone for joining us. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day. I'm Katie McLean. I'm a partner here at Energize Ventures. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Energize, we are a venture fund out of Chicago, and we invest in solutions to advance the next generation of energy and industry. We're thrilled to have you all join us here today for this discussion on the state of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We have a terrific panel lined up for you. For full disclosure, here at Energize, we have invested in both the charging and site tracker, and we're also excited to bring in additional perspectives from both ChargePoint and Eversource to the conversation. So thank you to all the panelists for joining us today. Our goal is to give you a diverse perspective of what's happening in the EV charging and infrastructure markets by bringing together a variety of viewpoints from utilities, EV charging companies, and software providers. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a couple of logistics. I'm sure you all have done many Zoom webinars here in this new world that we find ourselves in and are familiar with how they all work. Since it's such a large audience, as you guys can see, we've got 220, we had over 600 folks register. So super excited about the attendance on this webinar. But we do have you all on mute. And if you have a question you'd like to have us address, please use the Q&A feature. And then if there's time at the end, we will try to get to the questions. And if you have one for a specific panelist, please just include their name and we'll try to get you guys the answers. So right now we'll run through quick intros from each of the panelists and then we'll jump right into the discussion. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Michael, why don't you kick us off?
Awesome. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Hi, I'm Michael Hughes. I'm with ChargePoint. I'm our Chief Commercial and Revenue Officer. Glad to be with you today. And Katie, you want me to walk through slides now, yeah?
Please.
Yeah, great. So let me give a quick intro into ChargePoint for folks out there. Broadly, I think ChargePoint's been around for about a dozen years. We started early in the space, probably before there were electric vehicles in need of charging, to be honest. And started with really a different kind of vision. The idea that we needed to build a fueling network, that if we were going to enable the transformation to electric vehicles broadly, it would have to be easy for the driver. We'd have to consider how the utility would participate and the impact on the grid for stability, but also for load control. And we'd have to consider the site host, meaning where that charging station is going to live and how they're going to participate in the model, some for a business model, some as an amenity for employees or customers. And so with all that in mind, really came through with the idea that it needed to be a fueling network, not just a charging station, which means you have to remotely manage it, you have to be able to price it differently, you may have to have a wait list, you may have to have a full suite of features that allows you to remotely service, manage, and control a device, recognizing it's going to have different business models. So with that model in mind of creating this fueling network, ChargePoint is now probably a 700-person-ish company. Somebody leverages a ChargePoint charger every 2 seconds to collect a charge. And as you can see in the slide, millions of miles have been driven on fuel that we've helped provide. What we are is often a little bit confusing to folks, so I thought I'd provide a little bit of context around that. So if you can click, Max, let me walk through who we are and what we do. So basically, across the top on this slide, you'll see a variety of constituents that we serve. So there are fleet operators that are trying to deliver goods and services, or people, and they have a set of needs. And then going across the top, you also see the various use cases for when consumers fuel. Sometimes they need it quick, less than 15 minutes, and that might be at a convenience store or place along a highway. Someplace they might reside for a long period of time, which is their workplace, their home, retail and hospitality. And then finally home, where they will obviously spend the evening, and that might be in a condo complex or might be at their single family home. So we're going to service each of these sets of constituents with a set of technology, right? So that generally people think of this as hardware, and of course there is hardware, AC and DC, with an interface, without an interface, all of that, and we have a complete portfolio to enable that. But what connects all these different use cases together is a need for all of those functions you see at the bottom, right? So someone has to manage the stations, and the host wants to be involved with that. There may be pricing required, right? So at some point in time, you have pricing that you want to charge for. Got to manage the drivers, the vehicles, the energy that's coming into the unit, and how you want to leverage utility rates and time of use rates. Customers and drivers have to be enabled, generally through a mobile app, and then the hardware that supports it. So we are a technology company that enables all of these models. So Max, if you click, you'll see how what we provide to the various constituents. To the fleet operators, and these can be motor pool, delivery, transit, all of the above, they have a need for the items on the right. Cloud services for energy and vehicle management, charging infrastructure, help designing where they put where they put their depots, how they operate those depots, all of that. So we'll help them with those kinds of things. In a commercial world, we're enabling cloud services, infrastructure services support, even special financing options. So it's easy for the consumer to figure out, or easy for the operator to manage that and not have some huge expense, but manage it on an operating basis. And then we'll integrate into the consumer platforms like Apple, Google, and Amazon. So basically, these are the constituent groups we service. But I think there's a lot of myths around sort of the space and what charging is and where we are. So what I thought I would do is walk through this piece, which is trying to be crystal clear about what we do. We sell technology solutions. At the end of the day, we're a technology company building software and hardware to enable this fueling network. We do offer charging to businesses primarily, enabling high session, have a huge network of drivers. Most of the drivers today have a ChargePoint app and then use that to get charges where they need to. And so those are the things we do. What we don't do is we don't make money on energy. We do not own and operate stations. So we're not trying to monetize the energy, and we're not trying to own and operate stations. We produce the technology and then allow others to do that. And then all of those different participants, whether they're in the business or they're an employer, they have the opportunity to participate in a way that makes sense to them. We don't make money on drivers. Drivers are given access to the network, and we make that a seamless experience for them. But that's the model we're in. Sometimes that's confusing because there's a bunch of other folks out there. So I thought I would lay that out for you. So that's the rough idea of who ChargePoint is. Let me turn it back to you, Katie, and we'll keep rolling.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Appreciate that. Tilak, you want to go next and tell us a little bit about Eversource?
Yes, good afternoon. Afternoon here in Boston, and there is snow in the forecast. Hence this, those of us who live here just look at backgrounds like this to keep ourselves going. We are a regulated utility here in New England, about 4 million customers, gas and electric, and 8,000 employees. And a few years ago, we really made a pivot to really be a catalyst for clean energy in our region. There's certainly a lot of policy push for that here in all of the states in which we operate, just the 3 you see up there. And we've shed what little generation assets we had in the fossil fuel, and really have become one of the bigger players in offshore wind. You see there, we have 1.7 gigawatts of offshore wind under contract with our joint venture partner Ørsted out of Denmark. A lot of across the eastern states, you see, but New England and New York, and that's a big part. Very big player in energy efficiency, one of the larger ones in the country. We invest in energy efficiency, demand management, over $600 million a year in investment. That's the part of the business that I'm responsible for, associated with. And that's important because we leverage that platform that we have put in place to drive the EV charger adoption. We've also declared that we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030. I believe the first utility to do so. And certainly for a lot of the ESG investors out there, we've become a darling. And so real pivot as a utility. So that's context about the company. I can talk a little bit about our investments in electric vehicle use switch. So phase 1 of this investment was about $45 million investment in Massachusetts. And that was originally supposed to cover a 5-year period. We are oversubscribed, and we think we'll get there in about 3.5 or so. That didn't happen by itself. That did take some deliberate effort. We started out slow, and we could talk a little bit about it. We're expecting when we are done with this phase one, we would have 350 sites, charging ports, and certainly in the thousands, some, in the environmental justice communities. And also what we're doing is there's a phase two in development for additional expansion in Massachusetts, investment in Connecticut, looking at fleet charging, and also we can't forget the residential charging that Mike just mentioned. Where we are seeing those go in is on the chart there, the ones that we have put in place. Almost a third of it is in workplace charging, right? So that's really the big one. Really, most of it is in suburban lots with surface parking lots. That's where we are seeing the scale, which some exceptions in downtown areas, you always will have that. Municipal lots as well, though I will tell you the municipal, even more than others, are struggling with economics of justifying these. We are seeing multifamily unit dwellings, about 17%. Most of those are new construction. Yes, most of those are new construction. Again, many of them are in suburban areas, so a few downtown Boston, high-end type construction. And then you have the destination, which would be the malls and stuff like that, which is only 15% of it. And I think Mike alluded to this in his slide that a lot of the charging is going to likely to be taking place where people are going to be spending some time. So I'm sure we'll come back to that in a bit. Next slide. And I'll just close with some initial learnings. Like I said, when we started this effort out, it didn't automatically happen that we had a lot of folks lining up to be site hosts. What we found is that, ChargePoint and Volta and a lot of others have done this, but as you start to scale this even more regionally, you really need to invest in the whole infrastructure, the supply chain in the region. So the installers, the distributors, the value-added retailers, it turns out we had relationships with a lot of them that through our energy efficiency folks, and that we were able, certainly helped facilitate some connections with folks like Mike and Abdullah and others here. But those folks, those players on the ground are often looking to us to say, how real is this? Most of those guys are not venture-backed firms. And so they are looking at how do I, they're basically trying to use cash flow from operations to invest ahead of the curve. So it's important that they have strong relationships, that you have strong relationships with them so they have that confidence and invest. Right up front, site recruitment, if I go to the one on the left, you cannot take it for granted that people will just come just because you've developed a program. There's a high touch, educating the customer, very targeted marketing campaign based on who we thought would be a good thing. And really, once we did that, it sort of flipped the switch, and really we had a lot of interest and folks coming down. And then a lot of operational issues. You'll have to figure out there's legal issues around either easements or some kind of arrangement where you're using their site to do all the digging and all the infrastructure build out. So you'll have to clean up all that, make sure you streamline all of those things. And last but not the least, it's the standardization. And if and we all have, you got to figure out as you're putting your box to put your utility infrastructure in, is your disconnect going to be in the outside? Is it going to be the inside? If you had two different engineers pull this thing together, are they designing it the same way so it's easy to service? These are all, may seem very obvious, but it's not so obvious when you're trying to do it in the field and trying to scale it. So I'll pause there and we can take the rest in Q&A.
Great.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. So Abdullah, do you want to tell us all about Volta, please?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Katie, for putting up this wonderful webinar. This is really awesome. My name is Abdullah Sherkawi. I'm Senior Vice President at Volta. And I've been working on a slew of strategic, essentially, partnerships, mostly working with government and OEMs and utilities. Volta has focused slightly differently, but Volta has been essentially determined to smartly build the 21st fueling infrastructure that essentially drives EV adoption and drives an economic point of view on very capital intensive infrastructure. So how Volta started was with the thesis that, hey, let's use advertisement. Let's use something different than electrons to essentially build and have a quick payback that's independent on utilization. Result has been that, and what we've learned, two things, actually three things. One, that real estate site hosts and partners are really key for that. We need to provide, essentially, we're providing an amenity rather than just a current electrical service, and it has to benefit them. Number two, when you are when you're looking at ancillary monetization services, you find that utilization just goes off the chart. So Volta provides at no cost, long-term operational and maintenance and infrastructure for real estate site hosts in the public space. As a result, what we've learned across the past 10 years, we were founded in 2010 by Scott Mercer. What we found is that we get 5 times the utilization on every port that we have deployed. On level 2 ports, I know there are a lot of utilities listening to us. We get an average during the day of 4.1 kilowatt of load. We charge 8 vehicles per day on average for every level 2 port. We, on a DC fast charger, we have 26 kilowatt of load ongoing. It's open access, it's free, it's monetized through advertisement. What we've learned throughout the past few years is that actually when you show this to real estate site hosts, they actually really start understanding the benefits of this amenity, and they actually contribute to it. So monetizations went from just advertisement to a lot more across the board. I want to agree actually with Michael at ChargePoint. I mean, he made a really good point. The 21st century fueling infrastructure will not happen as a fueling retail. It will be an amenity. And I won't take too much of the time, and I'll leave maybe a little bit of time for Q&A, but what Volta has discovered is, I mean, we have this payback from monetization, from advertisement, and then from site hosts. And we essentially have shown that we can invest, maximize every dollar invested into utilization by actually not looking at utilization, which then actually drives utilization and adoption. In the current context, and this is why I'm showing this slide, this has been really interesting. We essentially have built a media platform, a messaging platform, where we have essentially used all of the Volta stations nationwide to contribute messaging around COVID. And the response has been tremendous. The understanding that not only can we build infrastructure, can we build load, can we monetize this load and this model, we actually have found another way that has been tremendous in terms of response in the emergency case that we've had so far. So I'll stop there. Actually, I want to add another point. What we've learned throughout the past 10 years is usually like electric vehicle charging 1.0 goes to a property and looks for what's the place where you can optimize for installation, where is the electrical service coming in. What Volta has done throughout these past 10 years is we actually went to what we call electric vehicle charging 2.0, where we look at a city and we use data both from transportation, where people go out in the public outside of work and home commute. And we essentially have been using data-driven design of where the sites, where the dollars invested for the load, for the utilization, and for the visibility, hence the impact, are maximum. And then we've been developing these machine learning tools that have quickly evolved into, we can take a city and essentially map it and see where utilization will be maximum. And we take that to our real estate hosts, and it works incredibly well. And I'll stop there.
Great, thanks. Moving on to Giuseppe, you want to give us an intro into SiteTracker?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. At SiteTracker, we say we help folks build the future faster. And what that really means is we offer software focused on managing the complexity associated with deploying this technology. And it's really about deploying, operating, and maintaining assets and technology, and in this case, EV chargers. Our platform is designed to be used by all the members in this ecosystem. So charging companies like ChargePoint and Volta, their contractors, utilities, and municipalities. And it's really focused on helping them control all the activities associated with, getting these EV charging stations out there and then ultimately maintaining them. Our view is that this is a bigger and bigger problem to solve as volumes are increasing, and so is the complexity associated with managing and building these networks. So we're the software backbone that helps folks manage all of that. Outside of EV charging, we have other customers in telecommunications and other industries that use our platform to deploy technology all over the world, but we're really in love with this industry. So thanks for having us.
Great, thanks. Let's go ahead and jump into the discussion here and get started. First, real quick, the first question will be for everyone. I'll go ahead and I'll call on you guys again just to keep the thing flowing. But if you want to respond on somebody else's answer, please jump in so we can keep it as conversational as we possibly can here on a webinar. And then quick time check, it's 1:22, so let's try to keep our responses under 2 minutes going forward. Just to get started here, what are some of the major trends that you guys think that we're going to see in electric mobility this year? So high level overarching trends. And then also from your perspective, what do you see changing as a result of this COVID-19 pandemic that we're in right now, both in the short term, but then also in the long term? And then I think to kick us off, we'll start with Volta. So Abdella, can you give us your response?
Yeah, so for the response to COVID-19 is actually an interesting one. What I've been essentially seeing is the dollars have been sucked out of the room from public funds, and a lot of companies are relying on public funds to actually make a business case. At Volta, we have not taken a single public dollar except for carbon credits. And what we see is we have, and I would like to open that to all of the industry actually, we have thousands of shovel-ready projects that people can put back to work. It's infrastructure, it's capital intensive, but all of these projects still will allow us to actually come out of this crisis swinging out of the bat.
Great. And then Tilak, what are you seeing over at Eversource?
Look, we are a utility, so let me give you the long view. Back in my office, I've got a stash of documents, really interesting ones from the 1900s. I've got rate cards from 1920, 1923, milestones for the Cambridge Electric Company, for Boston Edison. That was us 100 years ago. And my point is, this is when the country was in the throes of electrification, right? And I'm sure at that time, people were thinking about the impact of Spanish flu, the First World War, the Big Depression, similar things. My point is, in the long run, I think what we are dealing with here is a secular trend, new trend around electrification of transportation. It's going to be there. We certainly could see some short-term cash flow impacts, slowdowns, but I do think the longer-term trend towards mobility, moving electrification of it, is here to stay. And I think now, to Abdella's point, now is the time to really be investing in the infrastructure to support that for a whole host of reasons that we can get into.
Great. And Michael, what are you seeing over at ChargePoint?
Yeah, so I think echoing the comments, both Abdella, just let's get shovel ready projects going, but largely from Talak in that, yeah, I mean, as we look at it, this is a blip, right? COVID, even the oil and gas prices these days that are so low, these are blips that will get past. The migration on a macro level to electric transportation doesn't seem to slow down. So we're seeing a change and a shift in kind of the buyers and who's prioritizing it. Clearly, you know, retail hospitality a little bit tougher, but utility programs continue to roll. Electrical contractors are eager to go to work. So, and fleet really is taken off. So I think that the big opportunity that we see out there, and Talak mentioned in his comments, creating programs to enable it, is the opportunity for electrifying fleets is taking a higher priority. As none of us can leave our homes and we have to have everything delivered, you can imagine how much better that would be if that was all electric. So I think those are the things that we see.
Great, thanks. And Giuseppe, what are you seeing over at SiteTracker?
Yeah, and our side, I think there's growing conviction in the volumes that are about to just hit everyone in this industry. And we're seeing that drive investment into how the work gets done and how folks modernize their operations. So what's keeping us very busy is working with all the different folks in this industry to discuss how, you know, or to really map out how they're going to deploy that next level of volume, right? And related to the current environment, you know, in some areas, construction's not an option, right? And some other areas, you know, work can still get done. So what we're seeing is folks trying to be very smart about doing work where they can, you know, while this is happening, and keeping their teams busy and operating through this, because there's this really strong belief that at some point it'll get back to normal and they want to maintain their teams and come out of this working in a bit more modern way. So we're super busy working with folks to design how they're going to manage that next level of volume, manage their contractors, and just essentially reduce that dollar per deployment and build bigger networks.
Great, thanks. Any final comments on this from anyone before we move on? Any responses?
So one of the pieces I would like to add, Katie, is that I think that a lot of the focus of you know, policy making is going to go through putting people back to work. Hence my initial comment on shovel ready, and same for Michael and Tilak. And the other one is actually non-financial impact ways to help put more infrastructure on the ground will probably be favored across the legislature or the legislatures, you know, as we get back to work. And I think that's something we can all you know, work together on to remove essentially obstacles that do not necessarily have a financial impact.
Great. No, I couldn't agree more. We're hopefully have some opportunities, positive opportunities come out of this as well. So let's move to the next one. So there are a number of external factors affecting the EV market right now. We talked a little bit about the declining price of oil, and then there's the OEM financial situation. So from your guys' experience, what's the best way to navigate some of these challenges, again, in the short term and then thinking about the long term? We'll go ahead and we'll start with talk to us about Eversource.
You know, I really think this is focus on the basics. We got to build scale here, and we got to drive. There's two things. One, we need more electric vehicles. You know, all the charging infrastructure in the world doesn't do you any good if you don't have the vehicles. So hopefully that's outside the scope of this conversation, but somebody is figuring that piece out. To get the charging infrastructure out there, you got to focus on the basics right now. That is, how do you get more ports out there? Really, we are talking level 2 ports. As you get to DC fast, the economics become more difficult. How do you get more ports in more places? I think a more realization of where these things are going in, education of the customers and the site hosts, and what I mean by that is, you know, we've all been trained to come up with business cases that are down to the unit level, saying, am I going to make money on this particular charging station if I'm putting it in? Yet part of it is our site hosts are figuring out as, that right now, that's hard case to make just in and of itself on a standalone basis. So there are other factors they got to consider: the clientele they are handling, the workforce they are tracking, so on and so forth. So it's really around make sure you're focused on the basics and don't expect this thing to pencil out, on a standalone basis immediately. The second thing is when I talk to the basics, there is fleets is an important one, light duty fleets. Don't get to optimization too soon. I hear a lot of us just talking about vehicle to grid and whatnot, and our focus is let's get the grid to vehicle and the basics down first, and then we'll worry about that.
Yeah, I love that. I would say much the same as Tilak. Let's get the vehicles out there, right? This is a question that we're going to talk a little bit about later. But man, if cars are available to buy that people like, or in the fleet space, light duty, medium duty trucks are available, the whole thing's going to happen. So that's the first and highest priority. I think the other thing that will happen through the course of all of these shifts is choosing your partners will be really important, right? Having somebody that's stable, going to be around, has the complete suite, or at least addresses enough of the gaps that you have as a company to work with, is really important. I think, we've been seeing a number of situations where we've had to help customers get out of a solution that is no longer available or supported or whatever. And I think just we'll see small companies go and have a hard time surviving this marketplace. And so I think choosing a partner that is stable and going to be around becomes really important. And then building programs, I think Tilak and I are of the same mind. It's a long-term game. And I think it will pay off very well in the long term, but having that vision is not easy for, the electrical contractor who's trying to pay rent on cash flow and trying to pay employees and all that. So being mindful of those folks is also important along the way.
No, thanks. I'd love to dig in on the vehicle part of it, which I felt like before pre-COVID, we were kind of on that way. You saw all the manufacturers were coming out with all the different models and everything. What are you guys hearing from them now in this new world that we find ourselves in?
I can take a first stab crack at that. So we've seen not a whole lot of change so far. I think schedules are slipping a bit in terms of when products get released, and the production volumes that we were hoping for or expecting are probably shifting by months, not by years, but by months. I think we've only seen really one model that I'm aware of that's kind of fallen off the radar, was that Lincoln Rivian combination. I think by and large, all the models that were planned from the OEMs are continuing. And this goes to medium and light duty as well, where those companies are really doubling down. And there's a huge demand for medium and light duty out there. The faster they can get the products out there, the better. I think all of the OEMs we talk to on that side of the house are stacked with orders, and they're just prioritizing customers, right? So who's going to get it first? How many can I produce this year, next year, and the afterwards? So I think I don't see any decrease in investment. In fact, some of the money in Europe to the auto companies will be tied to electrification. So I think the trend won't change. We may see some models fall out because these are big programs for the auto company, right? I'm going to build a new model and it's going to take 7 years to release. We may see some model attrition, but I don't think the trend will change at all.
Any other follow-ups to that?
I have a confession. I drive a 12-year-old manual transmission, and but I did put some money down on a EV, and maybe Mike, you have some influence with some of these OEMs to get mine. But
yeah.
What I guess I feel like we're at such a nascent stage of this market. They may be a little more, I really think the market has the capacity to absorb all of the EVs that will be produced, or likely to be produced, and more. Whereas if you take out the overall vehicle market and the number of EVs that even with all the announcements, it's still at a drop in the bucket. So I don't think the companies that are looking to produce these models are going to need to be worried about whether there's going to be customers for them. Certainly, they've got near-term cash flow issues to figure out, as in this depths of this thing, how are they going to prioritize the cash towards an EV platform investment versus other? But the to Mike's point, I haven't read anything that's a total shutdown of any folks who have been serious about this space.
Yeah, so I'd like to extend this sentiment. You know, to Michael's point, the infrastructure money is going to put people back to work. In Europe, maybe not in all the states here in the US, it will be tied to actually green infrastructure. And one thing, I mean, in order for EV adoption to really increase, we need cars, we need more models, we need, as Scott Mercer would say, we need sexy cars.
Yeah, good cars.
We need good cars, right? I mean, and we need trucks. So my conversations with some of the OEMs have been, we're in with those EVs that are coming in, and I believe the recovery money that's going to flow in from governments is actually going to require, to your point, Michael, it's going to require green infrastructure projects. It's going to require essentially electric vehicles, and so we'll get more models. They have been in the pipeline. There may be a sort of timeline change, but if we look at previous crisis, if we look at 2008, if we look at 2009, I mean, we've come back to work quicker rather than later, and we need the infrastructure, and the infrastructure and what we're all doing together requires essentially and helps putting people back to work. So the last bit, and I've seen a question flow by, and maybe I'll address it later, but it's really teaching, raising the awareness. And to some extent, within this current context, there is something important about what we can do with this infrastructure to tell this story that we are building the fueling infrastructure of the 21st century. And we're really, this crisis has shown how quickly the air can clean if we actually stop moving. So that may be one side, but if we move better, is the other side of the equation. And I think there is a lot that's going to be happening a lot sooner than we all realistically estimate.
Great, thanks. Let's move on to the next question. So what are the key accelerants that you guys are seeing for the EV adoption in the US going forward? Obviously, we talked about having the cars available, the need to build out the infrastructure. Can you guys either talk more about that or anything else that we have sort of missed yet? Tilak, why don't we start with you on that one?
So if I think about from our perspective, the way we think about this whole EV charging market is in a few big, so there's the residential stuff, which we are not really talking about, but everyone you talk to talks about 80% of the charging happening at home. That's a huge piece. We're not talking about it here, but really we need to address that as a utility. We spend a lot of time thinking about that and the impact on the distribution grid and so forth. So I'm just going to set that aside, but it's a big deal certainly for us. For the rest of it, what I would say is right now it's light duty vehicles, even fleets, what we're thinking really light duty fleets for medium commercial, for municipalities and so forth, because the heavy commercial or mid-sized commercial EVs are not available at scale in volume anyway. So really where we are focused is on this. We are focused on the workplace charging. Really the whole theme that we're trying to get to is really, I think your charging product needs to match the dwell time. And it's very difficult to make the reverse work. Maybe in the DCFC, the gas station analogy, some of those you could work, but the whole notion that yes, the opposite could work, but it's a tough one. I think what we're trying to focus on, what's the right charging product, given the dwell time that people naturally stay, whether it's workplace, destination charging at homes. And so really zeroing in on those fundamentals, how do you make sure we've got, and certainly we are the fuel and Mike's Fuel network. We spend a lot of time thinking about what impact it has on the grid and how we can mitigate impacts on either charger manufacturers or other people trying to monetize this. So I'll stop there.
Great, thanks. Michael, what are you seeing in the space?
Yeah, so I think, and I think it's been mentioned a little bit, but certainly policy has a big impact here, right? So regulators approving utility programs, grant programs continuing, those make a big difference. A couple bills in Congress for highway fast charge that are in the billions of dollars, those will make a difference. Enabling right to charge, right? So in a multifamily dwelling, especially as we're all living at home, having the ability to charge. Chicago just passed a law that says any new construction requires 20% EV ready spots. Those things will all drive it in a real way. So I think on the policy side, those are things that will make a difference. The grant and utility programs make a huge difference. And, you know, I mean, the programs we see working really well, the utility enables a make ready and provides the funding for that, and then potentially rebates the charger. And then you know, and then the customer wins, they get charging and they get access and all those kinds of things. The site host wins, they get it at a price that makes sense for them and they can take advantage of. And the utility wins, they have, you know, more load and the way to invest and get a rate of return on that. So there are programs, and we spend a lot of time with a bunch of utilities helping them design and shape these programs that that really work. And we've seen, in Talak's great example, where he's overloaded, right? He's got too many folks that want to come into the mix, and we're helping, and others are helping to try to make sure that, you know, you find the site hosts that are interested and enable that, help them understand the model. But I think those are key accelerants. Policy, grant, and utility, those three areas I think will make a big difference. And I can't help but go back to the car example. If there were cars to buy for less than $30,000 that were awesome, people would buy them. Tesla's cleaning the clock of everybody else. As EVs have continued to grow in volume, it's really Tesla at the expense of everybody else, which just says, you know, build a great car that people love and you're going to solve this problem. And in fact, infrastructure is not the problem. If there were great cars, infrastructure would solve itself. But there's not enough of these great cars out there.
Thanks. And Giuseppe, you guys are involved in a lot of the blocking and tackling of the infrastructure build out. What are you guys seeing?
Sure. Yeah. So we think there's a great opportunity to make it easier to deploy, right? And everyone who's involved focusing on their individual cycle times in this relay race, right? So the permitting complexity, if you're trying to deploy a national network of chargers is quite crazy. And if you're trying to get them energized and managing kind of the, you know, passing of a baton in the whole process is really difficult. So, you know, we think if everyone really focuses on the operations and getting their turnaround times down on the piece they own, you know, the infrastructure will come on air faster, and that'll really benefit the entire industry. So I guess the broader theme is just simplification, you know, as it relates to permitting and interconnections, to make it easier to deploy, you know, for the folks that are doing the work.
Great, thanks. And Abdallah, how about from you guys?
So I want to ask a question actually, you know, which is how so how can utilities essentially who really have a strong benefit into this EV infrastructure, I mean, if we think about it, so there are two questions. The first one, you know, you said 80% of charging happens at home. Now, my first question, and it's a tricky one, it's like how much of a bias on those 80% come from the fact that, you know, I have a car garage, therefore I have an EV, but if I live in San Francisco, I don't have a car garage. So therefore I don't have an EV. So, but still there are, you know, on average, depending on where you live, you know, 40 to 50% of people don't have a car garage. So how does that 80% from home charging applies? First question, and that's for you, Tila. The second one, I actually really agree with you, which is when we put this infrastructure and we can actually work together with utilities on just managing ancillary services, it's incredibly valuable, you know, and how do we do that?
Can I just quickly comment on that, Katie? Sorry.
Yeah, of course.
So I think the 80% is really work or home, right? So, you know, home is a healthy chunk, and those of us who have a have a garage can put a charger in there, and it's nice and it's easy and so forth. And then workplace is the other place we spend obviously an appreciable amount of time. And so I think we see that a lot. I think it's important to recognize and philosophically how we think about it. And I think we've already talked about it a little bit. And as Chalak gets his electric vehicle, he'll get this too. We don't charge like we used to, right? You go to the gas station and fuel, and everybody who owns a gas vehicle tries to replicate that model. That's not how it works. And I think you said it, Abdella, as well, right? Like you don't go to charge or go to fuel. You charge where you are. So where are you? You're shopping, you're at your home, you're at your work, and occasionally, in my 2 years of owning EV, 3 times, I've been on my way somewhere far away and needed to charge along the way. And thankfully, the I-5 corridor's got charging stations along at high speed. I can go accomplish that. So I think until you drive an EV, I think it's hard to conceptualize how people actually, operate. They want an easy to use, easy to manage, easy to find on their phone where the charging station is, and then operate their life. But by and large, we're creatures of habit. I'm charging right over there in my garage, and then I'm charging at the office, and occasionally I'll go charge, take advantage of it when I go into the city and charge at a parking facility. But back to multifamily, that's why I think regulation makes a big difference. Right? If I live in a 600-unit condo building and there's no charging in the garage, that's a problem. And I, as Abdella said, drive gas because of that. If I charge in the parking structure across the place, and we're working with Standard Parking, Ebriety are the guys that are launch programs to do EV charging across all of these locations. We need that. We need that, all of us to participate in that model.
So if I might just emphasize some of the things both Abdella and Mike just said, for the garage orphans, which is the technical term I learned, when I got into this piece, there's a few different emerging models, right? There is, for downtown Boston, there are parking garages that are not empty overnight, and they're looking at models to help people who might have EVs in their area charge overnight. There is suburban municipalities that we are having conversations with. That it's interesting. They've come to us and saying, "Where do you think we should put the thing?" And my question back to them is, "Where do people park their cars at night? You're the municipality. You should know."
Yeah.
Right. So let's go put some chargers there and see if it works. You would think. And there is multifamily unit dwellings. Boston's actually passed ordinance. I believe 25% of the new thing have to be EV ready. 25% of the lots. So there's a lot of emerging models there to address the garage orphans, and we'll figure it won't be. And one more I've seen or heard, we're not doing it. I think some of our peer utilities are doing it, is really having a gas station like entity, maybe not on highways, but could be in near multifamily unit dwellings to help, and that could be a DC fast. But we're not there yet ourselves.
And on the regulatory front, are you guys seeing the most activity at the state level with municipalities passing those kind of regulations at the city level or the state level, or then we're looking at the infrastructure stuff at the federal level? Where are you guys seeing the most either activity or the most promise for moving the needle forward?
Oh, we're not looking at the federal level for anything. Let's be honest here.
Under the infrastructure umbrella, hopefully there'll be some sort of infrastructure play here.
It is, and that could be, but really the EV investments have all been driven at a state level, and we are lucky to be in an area where, we've got very progressive regulators, policymakers, and all the states in which we operate. They're really committed to climate change, and electrification of transportation is a big deal, and we're all in on that. It's very easy for us to, and to be fair, in this environment, we really have to give credit to those policymakers, legislators, and regulators in this environment for them to stand up and say, we're going to continue to invest in this infrastructure. Takes a lot of political courage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think there's an easy easy answer from my perspective. I think state and federal, and federal has to enable programs and methodologies that enable all of this to happen. And there's some things that they're working on, but by and large, is state, local regulations and programs that are driving it. And we see that everywhere. So, I mean, the federal government can enable grant programs and make a big difference. We see them doing some highway fast charging initiatives, and these are the bills we see on the floor in Congress that we'd love to see get through. But, you know, all of these folks have to participate.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with Michael and with Tilak, although I think given the current context, there may be opportunities, you know, on infrastructure work. And I think we should all work together with the federal, state, if we can, to drive that. On the state and local level, and to, you know, I think I made the point a little earlier, which is laws that do not require any financial impact might be favored in the current context. And there are lots of things that AHGs, you know, local jurisdictions and state have been doing. Like, for instance, one that I know is transversal to all of our companies. You know, it's just like simple permitting. And that we've been working, and I think we can push, which does not really have a financial impact, but really helps to reduce the timeline, because we're working with site hosts, whether as ChargePoint we're selling them software, or whether as Volta we are providing them with the long-term service and maintenance. You know, we still have to deliver that service to them, and permitting is just, and actually California, as one of the states, is a state that's like takes longer than a lot, and it's actually at the local level. The state has issued mandates for streamlining permitting, yet localities still take their time. The other piece is really about awareness, education, and using this infrastructure to really raise awareness and educate the population, where the community at large, where they go. You know, I mean, today in this context, we are in essentially like, what are essential services? You know, how can we talk to the population? How can we talk to the community and just give them a message that this is actually one thing that's important?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to tag on to that. You know, folks come and speak to us about moving faster, and, you know, it's generally the charging companies, the contractors, and the utilities. But now we're starting to see the municipalities come to us. And in this environment, what they realize is it's not okay to ask people to come in person to get a permit, you know, to have a conversation about a permit in all jurisdictions, right? So I think we're starting to see the very early days of them evolving. And we're pretty optimistic about what will happen in the next 12 or 18 months, you know, on the municipal permitting front to really help folks move faster there.
Great, thanks. Any other thoughts on that question? Well, we're coming to a close here, so I want to wrap with kind of a catch-all to give you guys a chance to make final comments that you would like to, so it's very broad, but generally, you know, what are you most excited about when you think about the future of mobility and EVs? Michael, we'll start with you.
Okay. Yeah, so just a quick comment, just to connect before I get to that, to Locke's comment and a bunch of other comments about this. So for our utility friends out there, right, utilities are key to this whole process, right? Like, we have to work together to enable electrical infrastructure in your territories to be successful, in your service territories. And there's a great way of doing it, and there's a great path that we've set up. Eversource has worked well with us, SCE, SDG&E, PG&E, AEP, all these folks. So I think this is really important. I would focus on workplace first. I would focus on home second, and then fleet, which is coming fast, next. And I think those are the things that I would monitor for. Workplace in particular, if there's charging at work, people are 6 times more likely to buy an EV. So you put in one, you're going to have utilization, and that's going to drive more and more, which is going to give you more opportunity to invest and make a return. But what am I most excited about? Frankly, I'm excited about conversations like this, where the awareness is broad, right? Where you're having utilities, charging companies, site tracker, who makes a big difference for making these things get in the ground, all of this coming together. And we see it beyond this, right? Google and Apple leaning in on making the experience better from a mapping perspective, the auto companies trying to figure out how do they make the experience better for companies, commercial real estate companies trying to figure out how they enable charging at their offices that they own or their multifamily that they own. So I think broadly the awareness is what's really getting me excited. It's very different than it was a year ago. People recognize this is coming. We're going to go from 2% to whatever, 80% over a 30-year horizon. So how do we get there? So the awareness is helping. And the second thing I'd say is enlightenment. Like effectively people recognize it's not as simple as putting a plug in the ground and calling it a day. You have to manage it. You have to manage the load. Put 3 EVs on a street, you're going to pop the transformer at the end of the street because it's half the load in the house. So managing it, thinking thoughtfully through it, driver experience, managing the utility load, all of those things. And then I think someday I'll be excited about availability of vehicles, trucks, all of that. I'm excited that there's more announced. I'm excited that there's more coming. But I think the awareness and the enlightenment are there now. And getting better every day, and availability will drive it. So we're in for a pilot fleet year that will lead to a massive deployment fleet year next year. And I think the same thing from a vehicle perspective. We'll see some vehicles this year, but next year it'll be bigger and then bigger again ongoing.
Great, thanks. Tilak, how about you?
So Mike's going to ensure I get my EV, and I'll make sure the transformer doesn't blow. So on a serious note, look, utilities, we know how to do this. We know how to manage load growth. And frankly, even it's not just about increasing the size of the base infrastructure. We're doing a lot of load management, demand management type stuff. We did in last summer, a year ago, we called EV as part of our demand management program. We've called EV load management things, and ChargePoint has responded to it. So we've got a lot of those mechanisms in place, both from a technical standpoint and an economic standpoint. That was a pay for performance type event. So we're very good at that, and I think we can do that, and we have a real important part in scaling this. The other thing I would touch on, Katie, if I might, in 30 seconds, I see a lot of questions about how are people justifying this, site hosts justifying this. It's comes down to what Mike says. What happens often, we are seeing, is in the workplaces, you find either building owners, tenants, or large companies in suburban areas, they're starting to see a lot of people driving EVs. And then they suddenly realize they need to cater to that clientele, either one from a retention standpoint or a tracking standpoint. And that's part of the financial business case that falls outside of the standalone, am I going to make money, get a return on investment on energy? So you've got to take that into account. Municipalities, it's often driven by sustainability type stuff. And certainly there's an element of long-term, the maintenance of EVs is less than, gas-powered vehicles. So it's a combination of those things. So there's certainly other factors outside of the EV charger itself that come into play as they're thinking about how do we go about justifying this. I'll pause there.
Great, thanks. Giuseppe, how about you?
Yeah, I think what we're most excited about is, everyone's continues to get more efficient as they're operating, right? And this is allowing them to find that next level of productivity and build bigger networks, right? And everyone's taking the time to really move into scaling mode here. And we're really enjoying working with folks to, again, find a way to do that. So we're just excited by the volumes that are coming and building some big networks with folks and helping them do things faster and more efficiently.
Great, thanks. And Abdallah, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, for sure. So for us, and for a whole EV charging industry, really, it's really about creating, this new fueling infrastructure. At Volta, we really focus on how to use data to build it better for utilization. And I'll go back to my comment on, if we are to have EV adoption, if we are to convert, I think there is an NREL study that shows that, 95% of electric vehicles miles traveled will be you know, charge on level 2 or at home or at work or at the places where people shop. It's really about the amenity and how to work with real estate partners. I think one of the panelists, Tilak, I think you said municipalities know where people park, and that's really the key piece. It's about real estate. It's about providing an amenity to real estate hosts, whether it's a workplace, and I get your point, Michael. You know, ChargePoint has made a good deal from workplace charging. And you know, at Volta, we are really focusing on public charging and how to build that. And I think all together we can do something really quite amazing, which is really showing that fueling infrastructure is not a retail, you know, a fueling retail place, but it's an amenity that provides ancillary services. And then to your point, Tilak, you know, our business model essentially allows such utilization and load that it actually creates value right away for utilities.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. Love all the conversations and different dynamics. Glad we had such a good broad spectrum of the industry here today represented to share their viewpoints. I know we have a bunch of Q&As that we did not get to. Some of them were kind of answered on the fly here. What we will do is we'll compile them all and we'll figure out a way to share them. I think we have everybody's info from signing up for the webinar. I know there was a question about slides. We'll try to get those to you, and then it has been recorded, so we'll figure out how we get the recording to the folks that are interested in getting that. But thank you again to the panelists. Thank you again to everybody who joined us. We're really excited to do this, and hopefully we can continue the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Katie. Well done. See ya. Thanks, everybody.